I drove to my father's house without warning, no call, no text. Just instinct pulling me there at nearly 10 at night. I knocked. He opened the door. For half a second, his face wasn't surprised. It was ready. His hands closed around my shoulders. He turned me, kicked the door shut behind us. "Listen to me," he whispered. "Get under the kitchen table right now. Don't make a sound." I'd never seen that look on his face before. Fear, and something colder underneath it. I didn't ask why. I just crawled. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment and tell me, what are you hoping to take from this story today? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Just a note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling, but the lesson and the emotions at the heart of this are real. Dad pulled me inside before I could say hello. His hand closed around my shoulder, not rough but absolute, and he kicked the door shut behind me. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but he shook his head once, sharp and fast, the way you'd stop a child from stepping into traffic. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and tight. "Get under the kitchen table. Right now. Don't make a sound." I stared at him. Vernon Brennan, 64 years old, retired mechanic. My father, who had never in my 33 years raised his voice at me to do something without explanation, stood there with a look I'd never seen before. Fear. And something harder underneath it, something cold and deliberate. I didn't ask why. My body obeyed before my brain could process. The kitchen table was massive, an antique walnut monstrosity he'd bought at an estate sale in 1995. It had 4 thick carved legs, and enough space underneath for a grown woman to crouch if she pulled her knees to her chest, and didn't mind the smell of floor polish. I crawled under. The wood was cool against my palms. I heard Dad walk to the living room, heard the creak of the sofa as he sat down, heard him pick up the remote and turn on the television, some news channel volume low. Then nothing. I counted 3 minutes of silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to make sense of what was happening. I'd driven over unannounced because I wanted to talk to Dad about something. What was it? It seemed so small now, crouched under this table, that I couldn't even remember. I worked as head of accounting at a mid-sized department store chain in White Plains. I was good at my job. I had a decent salary, a husband, a mortgage. I thought I knew exactly who I was. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. From where I crouched, I could see the edge of the kitchen doorway, a sliver of the hall beyond. I heard Dad get up, heard his footsteps steady, unhurried, cross the living room. The door opened. "Vernon," a voice said, a man's voice, friendly, warm. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Dad said. "Come in." Footsteps entered the house. I knew those footsteps. I had heard them every single day for 12 years. But to understand why I was hiding under that table, why my father had looked at me with eyes that held both fear and something like grim determination, you need to know what this house meant. Dad bought it in 1987, a 3-bedroom suburban place in White Plains, with a garage big enough for his tools and a backyard that got good sun in the summer. He was 26, then newly married, working 60-hour weeks as a mechanic at a shop on Central Avenue. The mortgage took 30 years to pay off. 30 years of every spare dollar, every overtime shift, every skipped vacation. By the time he handed me the paid-off deed to look at on my 28th birthday, the paper was soft at the edges from being unfolded and refolded so many times. This house smelled like engine oil and fresh-cut grass. It had cracked linoleum in the kitchen and a bathroom sink that dripped no matter how many times he tried to fix it. The walls were the same off-white they'd been painted in 1987. It wasn't much, but it was his. The only thing he owned outright in this world. And someone had been trying to take it for 12 years. I didn't know that yet. From under the table, I heard the two of them walk into the kitchen. Chairs scraped. They sat down at the table right above me. I could see their shoes. Dad's old work boots, scuffed and salt-stained from winter, and the other pair, brown leather dress shoes I'd seen lined up by our bedroom door every morning since 2013. "Coffee?" Dad asked. "Sure," my husband said. "Thanks, Vernon. I need you to understand I trusted my father more than I trusted my own instincts that day." Desmond Hewitt, 34 years old when I met him at a town gala in 2011. Charming, attentive. He worked in sales at a car dealership and had an easy smile that made people want to buy things from him. We married in 2013. I loved him. Or I thought I did. I wasn't sure anymore what the difference was. I heard the coffee maker hiss and bubble. I heard Dad set 2 mugs on the table. I heard Desmond take a sip and make a small appreciative sound. So, Desmond said, his voice casual like they were about to talk about the weather. I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead, Dad said. A pause. I pressed my back against the table leg, trying to breathe quietly. The smell of floor wax was making me dizzy. Or maybe it was the fear. It's about the house, Desmond said. My father said nothing. I've been thinking. Desmond continued, his tone still light, still friendly. You're getting older. 64 now, right? This place is a lot to manage on your own. 3 bedrooms, the yard, all that maintenance. And with property values in White Plains going up the way they have. What are you asking? Dad's voice was flat. Desmond laughed, a small, uncomfortable sound. I'm asking if you've thought about selling, or, and hear me out, if you'd consider signing the deed over to me and Leora. For estate planning purposes. It would make things cleaner down the line, avoid probate, keep it in the family. I felt something cold slide down my spine. Keep it in the family, Dad repeated slowly. Exactly, Desmond said. You'd still live here, of course. Nothing would change. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork, Desmond said above me. I pressed my spine against the table leg and tried to slow my breathing. My husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, was sitting 3 feet above my head, asking my father to sign away his house. But to understand why Dad hid me under this table, you need to know how I met the man whose footsteps I'd just heard. More importantly, you need to know how he chose me. December 2011, the White Plains Town Hall Christmas Gala. I was 20 years old, fresh out of college with an accounting degree and a job offer from a department store chain. I wore a green dress my mother had bought me before she died, too formal for my age, but I didn't know that yet. I stood by the punch table, trying to look like I belonged at an adult party. Desmond Hewitt walked up to me at exactly 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because I'd checked my watch 3 times in the previous 10 minutes, debating whether I could leave without seeming rude. He appeared with a whiskey glass in one hand and a smile that looked spontaneous, easy, like he'd just noticed me and couldn't help himself. You look like you're calculating the optimal exit time, he said. I laughed. It was exactly the right thing to say to an accountant who was bad at parties. We talked for an hour. He asked about my job, my degree, whether I liked working with numbers. He made accounting sound interesting. He made me feel interesting. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until I was 30 years old and hiding under a kitchen table, was that Desmond had been watching me for 40 minutes before he approached, timing his entrance, waiting until I was alone, uncertain, ready to be rescued. He was 34 then. He worked in sales at a used car dealership. He had an easy charm that made people want to trust him, want to buy things from him, want to believe whatever he said. He'd obtained a list 3 weeks before that gala. A list of families who owned original land parcels in White Plains and the surrounding area. Families with clear titles and no outstanding debts. He'd cross-referenced that list with families who had only children, preferably daughters, and parents old enough to be thinking about retirement, but young enough to still have equity. My father, Vernon Brennan, 64 now, but 50, then had bought his house in 1987, paid it off in full by 2007. Only child me. Occupation accountant, which meant I had access to financial information and trusted numbers more than instinct. I had the highest safety index on his list. I need you to understand something. I thought I was choosing him. I didn't know I'd been chosen first. We dated for 2 years. Normal dating. Coffee shops and movies and dinners where he paid, and I offered to split, and he insisted with a smile that made me feel taken care of. He met my father in spring 2012. They got along. Desmond asked questions about cars, about engines, about the work Dad used to do. Dad answered, cautious but polite. Looking back now, I wonder if Dad sensed something even then, some instinct honed over 40 years of being the guy people tried to rip off when their transmission failed. But he said nothing. What could he say? My boyfriend was polite, employed. He showed up on time and didn't drink too much and shook hands firmly. Summer 2013. That's when Desmond made his move. We'd driven upstate for a weekend trip. His car, a 10-year-old Honda Accord he'd bought at auction, broke down on a back road 20 miles from the nearest town. We had to stay at a roadside motel. 1 room, 1 bed. I was 22 and in love, and it felt like an adventure. The next morning, Desmond drove straight to my father's house. I stayed in the car confused while Desmond went inside. Through the kitchen window, I watched him sit down at the table, the same table I was now hiding under, and say something that made my father's face go very still. Later, Dad called me inside. "Your boyfriend has something to say to you," Dad said. His voice was flat. Desmond stood up. He looked serious, almost nervous. He took my hand. "I told your father the truth," he said, "that we were together last night. And I told him I want to do this right. I want to marry you." I felt my face go hot. I looked at Dad, expecting what anger, disappointment. He just looked tired. "If that's what you want," Dad said to me, not to Desmond. His eyes held mine for a long moment. "Is it?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. Desmond had just confessed to my father and asked to marry me. It was old-fashioned, honorable, romantic in a way I didn't think men were anymore. 22-year-old me thought this was the most romantic thing that had ever happened. 33-year-old me, crouching under a table, finally understood it was the opening move in a 12-year con. The car hadn't broken down by accident. Desmond had loosened a belt connection the night before. He'd engineered the whole situation, the breakdown, the motel, the confession to back my father into a corner. To weaponize Dad's honor code. A mechanic from a generation that believed if you compromised someone's daughter, you married her. Desmond knew exactly what he was doing. We married 6 weeks later. Small ceremony at the courthouse. Dad wore his good suit, the navy one he'd bought for my mother's funeral. He walked me down the aisle, which was really just the length of a judge's office, and shook Desmond's hand when the judge pronounced us married. I have a photo from that day. In it, Dad is smiling. I used to look at that photo and feel warm, feel like everything had turned out right. Now I see it differently. That smile wasn't happiness. It was the expression of someone who just lost a game he hadn't known he was playing, who sensed manipulation but was bound by his own code to accept the outcome. He knew something was wrong from the very beginning. He just couldn't prove it yet. And he spent the next 12 years watching, waiting, gathering evidence I was too in love, and then too tired, too worn down, too busy making excuses to see. Above me in the present, Desmond's voice continued. "It would make things so much simpler," he was saying to Dad. "Just sign the deed over. You'd still live here. Nothing changes. It's just a formality." I heard my father set down his coffee mug. The sound was very deliberate. "Let me think about it," Dad said. "Let me think about it," Dad said above me, his voice giving nothing away. I heard Desmond shift in his chair. A pause, then, "Of course. No rush, just makes sense to keep things simple, right?" 12 years, I thought, pressed against the table leg. 12 years of evidence I'd missed. It started within a year of the wedding. Desmond began visiting my father alone. Weekday afternoons, 2 or 3 times a month. He'd text me at work. "Stopping by your dad's. Want me to check if he needs anything?" I'd text back a heart emoji and think how lucky I was to have a husband who cared about my aging father. He'd bring beer. They'd sit in the outdoor chairs Dad kept by the garage, the ones with the faded cushions that smelled like cut grass and motor oil. They'd talk about baseball, about cars, about nothing important. "Your husband came by again today," Dad would tell me over the phone. "Good guy. Actually listens when an old man talks about the Yankees." I'd smile. See, he's bonding with Dad, becoming part of the family. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't piece together until I was 30 years old, and hiding under a kitchen table, was that every visit was reconnaissance. Each time Dad went inside to use the bathroom or grab more beer, Desmond would move through the house, not searching, observing. He'd stand in front of Dad's study drawer, the one where important papers were kept, and take photos with his phone, the property deed, Dad's signature on old utility bills, the layout of the house. He memorized where everything was kept, not to steal them, not yet, just to know. Across the street, Floyd Ashford mowed his lawn. Floyd was 70 years old, a retired postal route supervisor who'd lived in the same house for 43 years. He had a notebook, a spiral-bound thing he kept in his shirt pocket, where he recorded neighborhood activity with the dedication of a man who'd spent 4 decades tracking package deliveries and couldn't break the habit. Blue sedan license plate ending in 74J arrived at Vernon's house 2:47 p.m., departed 4:15 p.m. Floyd wrote it down every time. He thought it was odd that Desmond always arrived at exactly the same time, 2:47 p.m., which was precisely when my department store shift started. But Floyd just recorded it like he recorded everything. The mail truck, the recycling schedule, which neighbor's dog got loose on which day. Years later, that notebook would become evidence. But in 2014, 2015, 2016, It was just Floyd being Floyd, the neighbor who knew everyone's schedule and didn't know what to do with retirement except mow his lawn in perfect diagonal lines and write things down. I need you to understand every gesture of kindness was a measurement. Every beer Desmond brought was a key he was copying. By 2017, our 4th year of marriage, Desmond had a complete map of my father's house, my father's habits, and my father's trust. That was the year he approached me with the co-ownership idea. We were having dinner. I'd made pasta. Desmond was telling me about a client at the dealership who'd bought a used Camry and paid cash. Normal conversation. Then he passed me the salt and said almost as an afterthought, "Your dad's property taxes are probably higher than they need to be." I looked up. "What?" "Just thinking," he said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "If we co-owned the house, we could optimize the tax structure. I know a guy who specializes in that kind of thing. Your dad would still live there, obviously, but the paperwork would save him a few thousand a year." My accountant brain flagged it immediately. "That's not how property tax works," I said. "Co-ownership doesn't reduce the assessed value. You'd need to restructure as a trust or claim primary residence, which wouldn't apply because we don't live there." Desmond smiled, easy, not defensive. "You're probably right," he said. "Just a thought. My buddy mentioned it once, but he's in real estate, not accounting. You'd know better than me." He took a bite of pasta, asked me how my day was, changed the subject so smoothly I barely noticed. I felt smart, like I'd caught something before it became a problem. My instincts were working. I'd said no, and he'd accepted it without argument. What I didn't understand was that I'd just forced him to take the route I couldn't see. You know what's worse than being lied to? Thinking you caught the lie when you've only seen the decoy. Later, much later, I would learn that 2017 was the year Desmond's car dealership took its first major loss. He'd been gambling. Not casually, not weekend poker games with friends. He'd gotten involved with an underground network run by a loan shark named Brent Wolf. Desmond owed money, a lot of money. And Brent Wolf didn't care about excuses or payment plans. He wanted collateral, clean assets, something with clear title and no complications. Desmond had been working on getting my father's house for years, but now it wasn't just a long-term con, it was urgent. When I said no to the co-ownership proposal, Desmond already had Plan B ready. He didn't need my permission. He just needed my father's signature. And he'd spent 3 years building trust, learning where the papers were kept, and establishing a pattern of afternoon visits where he'd bring documents for Dad to sign. Small papers, innocent papers, neighborhood HOA updates, mailing address authorizations. The kind of thing you sign without reading too carefully because it's from your son-in-law, and surely he wouldn't. Above me in the present, I heard Desmond's chair scrape. "I should get going," he said. "Let me know what you decide, Vernon. No pressure, just think about it." "I will," Dad said. Footsteps. The front door opened, closed. I stayed under the table, not moving, not breathing, until I heard Dad's footsteps return to the kitchen. He bent down, looked at me through the gap between the table legs. "You can come out now," he said quietly. I crawled out. My knees ached, my hands were shaking. "How long?" I asked. My voice cracked. "How long have you known?" Dad looked at me for a long moment. "Since the wedding," he said. "Maybe before." "Since the wedding," Dad said. "Maybe before." I stood in his kitchen, my knees still aching from crouching under that table, and tried to process what he'd just told me. He'd known for 12 years. 12 years of watching, waiting. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Dad looked at me with something that might have been sadness or might have been resignation. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," he said. "Not without proof. How do you steal a house one signature at a time without anyone noticing? You start small. You start with papers that don't matter." 2018. Desmond showed up at Dad's house on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work. He had a manila folder. "Hey, Vernon," he said, settling into his usual chair at the kitchen table. "Got some HOA paperwork. Just need your signature on a couple things. Mailing list updates, that kind of boring stuff." Dad signed. Why wouldn't he? The papers looked official. His son-in-law was being helpful, making sure the neighborhood paperwork stayed current. What Dad didn't know, what neither of us knew until much later, was that tucked between those HOA forms was a pension fund withdrawal authorization. $200. Small enough that the bank wouldn't flag it. Small enough that Dad wouldn't notice it missing from his monthly statement right away. Desmond did it again 3 weeks later. Different papers, different excuse, same result. He did it 47 times over 4 years. 200 here, 300 there, sometimes less. Never enough to trigger an alert. Never enough to make Dad look twice at his bank statements, and think something was systematically wrong instead of just normal monthly variation. By 2022, Desmond had drained $12,000 from Dad's retirement savings. $12,000 fed directly into interest payments to Brent Wolf, the loan shark who didn't care where the money came from as long as it kept coming. And Dad signed every single authorization because family doesn't steal from you while sitting at your kitchen table drinking your coffee. Family doesn't bring papers with a smile and hide theft between the pages. Except mine did. Here's what I want you to understand. I was an accountant. Numbers were my job. Reconciling ledgers, finding discrepancies, tracking money through complex systems. That was what I did 40 hours a week at the department store. And somehow I'd stopped tracking the numbers in my own life. November 2023, lunch break at the department store accounting office. I was sitting with Saskia Ramsey, a junior accountant who'd worked under me for 2 years. 28 years old. Sharp mind, the kind of person who spotted patterns the way some people spot faces in clouds. She'd just finished reconciling a vendor account that 3 other people had declared balanced, and she'd found a $2 discrepancy that had been hiding for 6 months. We were eating sandwiches. I was complaining about money stress, casual complaint, nothing serious. Just the normal married couple tension about expenses. Desmond handles most of the cash stuff, I said, scrolling through my phone to show her our shared budget app. But it feels like we're always a little short even though both our incomes are steady. Saskia leaned over her salad and looked at the screen. These withdrawals, she said, pointing at a line of small cash amounts. Do you know where that money went? Simple question, professional curiosity. It cracked something open. I looked at the numbers. Small amounts. Regular intervals. The pattern was too consistent to be random ATM withdrawals or irregular expenses. Desmond handles it, I started to say, and then stopped. Since when do I not know where money goes? I'm the head of accounting. Saskia didn't push. She just took another bite of salad and changed the subject to something else. Some office gossip about the vendor who kept submitting invoices with the wrong tax calculations. But the question stayed with me. That evening, I came home and Desmond was on the couch. Football game on TV, beer in one hand, remote in the other. Normal Tuesday night. I stood in the doorway and looked at him. Really looked at him. You know that feeling when you suddenly see the magic trick's mechanism. When the illusion collapses and you can't believe you ever fell for it. That's what Saskia's question did to my marriage. I didn't see the man I'd married, I saw an unbalanced equation. Money going out that I couldn't account for. Time unaccounted for those afternoon visits to Dad that were supposedly about bonding, but lasted exactly long enough for what papers to be signed regular intervals. Consistent pattern. The kind of thing I'd flag in a vendor audit without hesitation. Why hadn't I flagged it in my own life? How was work? Desmond asked, not looking away from the TV. Fine, I said. I went to the bedroom and opened my laptop, pulled up our joint bank account, started scrolling back through transactions. Small cash withdrawals. Always under $300. Always on weekday afternoons. I'd never paid attention before because they were small, because Desmond said he needed cash for client lunches or dealership expenses, or a dozen other explanations that sounded reasonable in the moment. But when you line them up, when you see the pattern, I thought about Dad's house, about Desmond's smooth proposal to co-own it, about the way he'd accepted my no without argument like it hadn't mattered. Because it hadn't. He'd already built a relationship with Dad that didn't include me. Afternoon visits, papers, trust. I closed the laptop, walked back to the living room. Desmond was still on the couch, beer in hand, eyes on the screen. Did you need cash today? I asked, keeping my voice casual. He glanced at me. Yeah, took some out. Client lunch ran long. Why? Just wondering. He turned back to the game. I stood there looking at the back of his head and thought, who are you? What equation have I been solving wrong for 10 years? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The man on my couch wasn't my husband anymore. He was a series of transactions that didn't add up. A pattern I should have caught years ago. An anomaly sitting in my living room drinking beer and watching football while somewhere I didn't know where yet, but I would money was disappearing. Within weeks, Saskia would show me something that would prove my instincts right and make them so much worse. Within weeks, I got my answer. The first time your husband asks you for money without meeting your eyes, something inside you breaks that you didn't know could break. It was November 2023, late at night. I was reading in bed, half asleep, when Desmond came in from the living room. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his back to me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. There's a bit of a problem with the dealership, he said. I put down my book. What kind of problem? Cash flow, temporary thing. Could we borrow from savings just for a few months until things stabilize? His voice had a flatness I'd never heard before, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. How much? I asked. Maybe, he paused. A few tens of thousands. I felt something cold settle in my chest. A few tens of thousands. Vague, no specific number. That's not how accountants talk about money problems. Can I see the dealership books? I asked. I can help figure out where the shortfall is. Yeah, of course, he said quickly. Too quickly. I'll pull them together when I have time. It's a mess right now. The software update corrupted some files, but I'll get them to you. He stood up, kissed the top of my head, and went to brush his teeth. I sat there in bed and thought, he's lying. I knew it the way you know the answer to a math problem before you work through the proof. The conclusion was already there. I just needed to trace back through the steps to see how I'd arrived at it. But I said yes. Of course I said yes. We were married. What else was I supposed to do? I transferred $20,000 from our joint savings account the next day. Desmond thanked me, said he'd pay it back by January. January came and went. The money didn't come back. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn until much later, was that the car dealership was fine. Breaking even, nothing spectacular but stable. The problem wasn't business. The problem was Brent Wolf. Desmond had been gambling since 2020. Underground football betting. The kind of operation that doesn't show up on credit reports or bank statements. The kind where you make your payments in cash to a man who doesn't care about your excuses. By 2023, Desmond owed him $150,000. The dealership story was just easier to tell me than the truth. I need you to understand why I didn't push harder when he wouldn't show me the books. It's the same reason people don't open test results they're afraid of. Sometimes not knowing feels safer than knowing. But evidence doesn't care whether you're ready for it. 2 months later, January 2024, I started noticing something. Desmond woke up before me every single morning. Not just early, before me. I'd been the early riser in our marriage for years, up by 6:30 to make coffee before my 7:45 shift. But suddenly Desmond was awake at 6:15, 6:20 at the latest. I'd hear the front door open while I was still in bed. The soft click of it closing. Footsteps on the porch. One morning I got up early, 6 a.m., and watched from the bedroom window. He walked out to the mailbox in his pajamas and slippers, pulled out the mail, flipped through it quickly, and came back inside. At 6 in the morning. Before the mail carrier had even started the route. He wasn't checking for new mail. He was checking for mail I hadn't seen yet, mail from the previous day that he'd missed. I started paying attention. Every morning, same routine. Sometimes while I was still asleep, sometimes while I was in the shower, but always before I could get to the mailbox myself. I didn't ask him about it, I just watched. February 2024, Saturday afternoon. I took the trash out to the garage. We had a metal burn barrel Desmond used for yard waste. I was throwing away a box and I saw something in the barrel that caught my eye. Paper, half burned, still showing fragments of print. I pulled it out. First National Auto Loan Services, Ford F-150, account number partially visible. Final notice printed in red. My hands started shaking. The Ford F-150 was our truck. Jointly owned. Both our names on the registration. We'd bought it in 2019, paid in full. No loan, no mortgage. Except according to this letter, it had been mortgaged. A year ago. Without my signature. Without my knowledge. And someone Desmond had been burning the notices before I could see them. I stood there in the garage holding that piece of charred paper. The edges crumbled black between my fingers. I could smell the ash and the faint chemical smell of whatever accelerant he'd used. Inside the house, I could hear the television. Desmond was watching a basketball game. Normal Saturday, normal life. I looked at the letter, looked at the house, looked back at the letter. You want to know the worst part? It wasn't finding the letter. It was putting it back. That was the moment I chose complicity over clarity. I can't take that back. I dropped it back into the burn barrel, threw the cardboard box on top of it, went inside, washed my hands. What do you want for dinner? I asked Desmond. He glanced up from the TV. Whatever you feel like making. I'm easy. I made spaghetti. We ate it at the table. He told me about a customer at the dealership who'd tried to negotiate a used Civic down to half price by claiming it had bad karma. We laughed. I did the dishes. He went back to the game. Normal Saturday. Except I knew. And he knew I probably knew or would know eventually. And I'd chosen to put the evidence back in the trash and pretend I hadn't seen it. Because part of me already understood what finding that letter meant. What it meant that our truck had been mortgaged without my signature. What it meant that he was burning bank notices. It meant I was married to someone capable of forgery, of systematic deception, of gambling away not just his money but ours, and then covering it with paperwork I'd never agreed to. And I wasn't ready to say that out loud yet. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it just makes me human. But you can't unsee evidence. You can only decide how long you're willing to pretend you didn't see it. I pretended for 3 more months. Then Saskia handed me a file that made pretending impossible. May 2024, 3 months after I put that burned letter back in the trash. Saskia walked into the cafeteria with her laptop and a question that would prove I'd married a professional. I did something, she said, sitting down across from me. I hope you don't mind. She turned her laptop to face me. The screen showed a court filing, New Jersey Superior Court, 2009. Cordell versus Hewitt. I ran a background check, Saskia said quietly. On Desmond. After our conversation about the cash withdrawals. I'm sorry, but I thought… Show me, I said. She clicked through to the case summary. Amanda Cordell, age 24, filed suit against Desmond Hewitt for fraudulent transfer of vehicle ownership. The complaint alleged that Ms. Cordell had purchased a used Honda Civic on installment payments in 2008 with the vehicle registered in her name. In March 2009, without her knowledge or consent, the title was transferred to Colleen Hewitt, Desmond's mother, and the remaining loan payments defaulted to Ms. Cordell's credit while the car disappeared. Case settled out of court for undisclosed amount. I read it twice. The words didn't change. Same pattern, Saskia said. She wasn't asking, she was confirming. Car and girlfriend's name, transferred to his mother. Victim left holding the debt. Same mother as accomplice. I thought about the Ford F-150, our truck, mortgaged without my signature. I thought about Dad's house, the co-ownership proposal I'd refused in 2017. I thought about 12 years of marriage and how many times I'd explained away things that didn't quite add up. Saskia leaned forward. This isn't the first time, she said. You weren't the first target. You were just the one with the biggest prize. My hands were shaking. I put them in my lap so she wouldn't see. How did you find this? I asked. Public records search. Cross-referenced his name with civil filings in neighboring states. This was in New Jersey, 15 years ago. But it's him. Same full name. Same mother's name on the transfer documents. 15 years. He'd been doing this for 15 years before he met me. Here's what you need to understand about patterns. Once you see them, they're everywhere. And once Saskia showed me that lawsuit, I couldn't pretend my marriage was the exception anymore. I wasn't special. I wasn't the one woman who'd changed him or made him want to be better. I was just the target with the biggest payout, the accountant with the mechanic father who owned his house free and clear. I thanked Saskia, closed the laptop, went back to work. That night, I didn't say anything to Desmond. I made dinner. We watched television. He fell asleep on the couch and I covered him with a blanket. But I was done pretending. I just needed to figure out what came next. 2 weeks later, Dad called me. It was late evening, nearly 9 p.m. He never called that late unless something was wrong. You need to know something, he said. His voice was tight, controlled. What happened? Desmond was here tonight. My stomach dropped. What did he want? He brought papers, Dad said. Said it was the transfer we'd talked about, asked me to sign. Did you? No. A pause. I read it first. Of course he did. Dad read everything. Every warranty, every contract, every piece of paper anyone ever asked him to sign. What was it? I asked. Quitclaim deed. But it didn't transfer the house to you and Desmond like he said it would. It transferred ownership to something called Northeastern Asset Holdings, LLC. I looked it up after he left. It's registered to a credit organization. Nothing to do with family. I closed my eyes. Northeastern Asset Holdings, not our names, not a family trust. A shell company. What did Desmond say when you asked him about it? I asked. Dad's voice went flat. He said it was administrative restructuring, temporary legal entity. It all comes back to the family eventually. Just paperwork. Just paperwork, the same phrase he'd used when asking me about the co-ownership years ago. I told him I wanted to keep the document to review with my attorney friend, Dad continued. And Dad stopped. I heard him take a breath. He snatched it, Dad said, right off the table, grabbed it out of my hand and walked out. Didn't say another word. Just took the paper and left. Slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I could picture it. Dad at the walnut table. Desmond across from him with his easy smile that wasn't easy anymore. The moment the mask slipped and Dad saw what I'd been trying not to see for 12 years. I sat there for a while after he left, Dad said quietly. Just sat there looking at the chair where he'd been sitting. And I thought about your mother. How she used to serve breakfast at that table every morning for 28 years. How she trusted people. How she would have wanted me to trust him because he was family. I didn't say anything, I couldn't. And I said no, Dad continued. Out loud, to the empty kitchen, just that one word, no. That single word no from a 64-year-old mechanic sitting alone at his kitchen table was the sound of a man deciding to fight back. I'm calling Curtis tonight, Dad said. You remember Curtis Lowe, retired police officer, lives 2 streets over. He'll know what to do with this information. Dad, I should have done this years ago, he said. But I needed to be sure. Now I'm sure. He hung up. I sat on my bed, holding the phone, listening to the silence. Downstairs, Desmond was watching television. Normal evening, normal life. Except Dad had just declared war, and Desmond didn't know it yet. When you're 64 years old, and you realize you're not fighting your son-in-law anymore but a criminal organization, who do you call? Dad called Curtis Lowe that night. Curtis was 65. Dad's oldest friend since elementary school, retired NYPD traffic cop who'd spent 30 years learning to recognize organized crime when he saw it. He picked up on the first ring. I wasn't there for that conversation. Dad told me about it later, months later, when everything was over, and we could finally talk about it without feeling like the walls had ears. He said he read Curtis every word he remembered from the quitclaim deed before Desmond snatched it back. The recipient organization, the legal language, the address, all of it. Curtis didn't interrupt. 30 years as a cop had taught him to listen completely before diagnosing. When Dad finished, Curtis went quiet. Dad counted 5 seconds of silence. Then Curtis said, Brother, that name you just said, Brent Wolf, I know it. Loan sharking underground gambling network extortion. Been operating in Westchester and Bronx for at least a decade. This isn't your son-in-law having money problems. This is organized crime. Dad told me his hands went cold when Curtis said that. What do I do? Dad asked. Curtis's answer was simple and terrifying. Don't do anything. Don't sign anything. Don't confront him. And for God's sake, don't let him know you're suspicious. Let me think about how we build a case that'll stand up in court. The word case made Dad's blood run cold. Because a case meant police, courts, legal proceedings. It meant this wasn't just a family problem anymore. How long do I have? Dad asked. I don't know, Curtis said. But men like Brent Wolf don't wait forever. If Desmond owes him money and your house is the collateral, they'll escalate. Be ready. You need to understand what it means when a retired cop goes quiet for 5 seconds on the phone. It means the thing you feared is worse than you thought. Dad hung up and sat alone in his kitchen for an hour. He didn't call me that night. He said later he didn't want to worry me until he knew what the plan was. But I think he was also afraid, not of Desmond, of what came next. 3 days later, Desmond came back. It was morning, 9 a.m. I was at work. Desmond didn't knock. He had a key, one Dad had given him years ago when we first got married, back when we all thought he was becoming part of the family. He walked into Dad's kitchen and put a manila folder on the walnut table. No greeting, no small talk, no beer. Just, Mr. Brennan, I need you to understand your options. Dad opened the folder. It was a psychiatric evaluation, or what looked like one. Official letterhead. Doctor's signature. Clinical language describing cognitive decline, memory lapses, inability to manage financial decisions. The doctor's name was someone Dad had never heard of, never seen, never met. It was completely fabricated. Desmond sat across from him at the table, the same table where he'd brought papers for 4 years, where he'd talked about baseball and cars and built trust one afternoon at a time, and delivered his threat with the calm precision of someone who'd thought it through carefully. If you don't sign this property transfer voluntarily, Desmond said, I will file this evaluation with the court as part of a guardianship application. The judge will declare you mentally incompetent. You'll be placed in a state care facility, locked door, 24-hour supervision. You won't be allowed out. He said it slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. Dad told me later that he felt 2 things in that moment. The first was rage. Pure, cold rage at the man sitting across from him who'd married his daughter and was now threatening to have him locked away like a criminal. The second was fear. Not fear of losing the house, not fear of losing money, fear of losing his freedom. Dad was 64 years old. Sharp. Independent. He'd lived alone since my mother died. Managed his own finances, maintained his own house, made his own decisions. He'd spent 40 years working with his hands fixing things, being the person people called when they needed help. The thought of being declared incompetent, of being locked in a facility where someone else decided when he woke up, what he ate, whether he could leave, was more terrifying than anything Desmond had threatened before. There are things worse than losing property. Losing your right to wake up in your own bed, to make your own coffee, to sit in your own kitchen, that's not losing a house. That's losing yourself. You have until Friday, Desmond said, standing up. Sign the transfer or I file the guardianship petition. He left the folder on the table and walked out. Dad sat there for 10 minutes looking at that forged evaluation. Then he called Curtis. He just threatened to have me institutionalized, Dad said. Curtis was quiet for a moment. Then, that changes things. If he's willing to forge medical documents and file false guardianship claims, he's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. We can use that. How? Give me 2 days, Curtis said. I'm working on something. But Vernon, this is serious now. This isn't just fraud. This is elder abuse, forgery, extortion. If we do this, we do it right. We build a case so airtight he can't walk away from it. Dad looked around his kitchen. The same kitchen where my mother had made breakfast for 28 years. The same table where he'd signed his mortgage papers in 1987. The same house he'd worked 30 years to pay off. I'm not signing, Dad said. Good, Curtis replied. Don't. And don't let him know you're scared, just stall. Tell him you need time to think. Tell him you want to talk to a lawyer. Whatever keeps him from filing that guardianship petition before I can get the pieces in place. Dad hung up and sat at the walnut table looking at the forged psychiatric report. He made a decision in that moment. If Desmond wanted to take away his freedom, Dad would take away Desmond's future. He just needed Curtis to show him how. Curtis spent 3 days using every connection he'd built in 30 years as an NYPD cop. What he found gave them exactly 30 days to win or lose everything. Dad told me about this later, after it was all over, after we could finally breathe again, sitting at that same kitchen table where it had all happened. Curtis called him at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. "I've found it, Vernon," Curtis said. His voice had that cop flatness that means bad news confirmed. Fake lost property registration filed November 12th, requesting duplicate deed. It's already in processing at the county office. Dad felt something cold settle in his chest. What does that mean? It means Desmond claimed your original property deed was lost, filed an official request for a replacement copy to be issued in his name as your power of attorney, which he's not, but he forged the documents. If the county approves it, he gets a legal duplicate deed. How long do I have? Dad asked. 30 days, Curtis said. That's standard county processing time for lost property claims. Once it's approved, he can do whatever he wants with your house. Sell it, mortgage it, transfer it to Brent Wolf, all without your signature, because legally he'll have a deed that says he has authority. Dad stood in his kitchen looking at the house he'd paid off over 30 years. The walls he'd repainted himself, the floor he'd refinished, the windows he'd replaced one at a time as he could afford them. 30 days. What can we do in 30 days, he asked. Curtis was quiet for 2 seconds. Then enough. If we're smart. If you're willing to play a role. What kind of role? The one Desmond wants you to play, Curtis said. Confused, declining, easy to manipulate. We make him think he's winning. And we record every word. An hour later, Curtis arrived at Dad's house with a black duffel bag. They sat at the walnut table under the dim kitchen light, the same light Dad had sat under for 37 years, and Curtis laid out the plan like a surgeon preparing instruments. New York is a one-party consent state, Curtis said. You can legally record any conversation in your own home without telling the other person, especially when they're committing a crime against you. We use that. He pulled a small device from his bag, professional-grade digital recorder. Tiny microphone no bigger than a shirt button. We need to hide this somewhere Desmond won't notice, somewhere he's seen 100 times and never looked twice. Dad thought for a moment, then pointed to the counter, the old AM/FM radio. It had sat there since 1998. Brown plastic casing. Antenna bent at an angle, still worked fine for the morning news. Desmond had sat at this table dozens of times over the years. The radio was just part of the background, like the refrigerator, like the table itself. Perfect, Curtis said. He opened the radio's back panel with a small screwdriver, attached the microphone to the interior with adhesive, ran a thin wire down through the counter gap to the cabinet below, where he tucked the recording device behind a stack of old dish towels. It's voice-activated, Curtis explained. Battery lasts 48 hours. I'll come by every other day to swap it out and download the files. He'll never know. Here's what you need to understand about one-party consent laws. They were written to protect people exactly like Dad from predators, exactly like Desmond. Now we need him to come back, Curtis said, with the transfer papers, and we need him to say out loud what he's really doing and why. Not hints, not implications, confession. How do I get him to do that? Dad asked. You play confused, Curtis said. Start forgetting things, repeating questions, mixing up dates. Make him think the fake psychiatric evaluation he showed you was right. Make him confident. Confident people get careless. Dad looked at Curtis, his oldest friend, the kid he'd known since third grade who used to climb trees behind the elementary school and was now a 65-year-old retired cop explaining how to set a legal trap for his son-in-law. I can do that, Dad said. Curtis nodded, then looked around the kitchen. His eyes settled on the walnut table. Vernon, he said, when did you and your wife buy this table? 1987, Dad said. First year we had the house. Estate sale. Marion wanted a table big enough for family dinners. We thought we'd have more than one kid. His voice caught slightly. Didn't work out that way. But the table stayed. Curtis ran his hand along the wood. Solid, heavy. The kind of furniture they don't make anymore. So it stood here 37 years, Curtis said. Through your wife's illness. Through raising your daughter. Through paying off this house. Through everything. Yeah, Dad said. Curtis looked at him with those cop eyes that had seen 3 decades of crime and survival and people who fought back. Then it survived worse than Desmond Hewitt, Curtis said. It'll be here when he's gone. That walnut table had held birthday cakes and tax returns and mortgage papers and 1,000 morning coffees. It had held my mother's hands when she was too sick to stand. It had held Dad's tools when he was fixing something. It had held papers Desmond brought with forged signatures. Now it would hold the weight of a war. Curtis left at midnight. The recording device was installed, tested, working. Dad sat alone at the table and looked at the old radio. 30 days until the fake deed application went through. 30 days to convince Desmond he was losing his mind. 30 days to get him to say the thing out loud that would destroy him. The countdown had started, and Dad, 64 years old, retired mechanic, who'd spent 40 years fixing other people's problems, was about to give the performance of his life. The countdown had started. Vernon had 30 days. How do you pretend to lose your mind convincingly enough to fool a predator who's been watching you for 12 years? You start small. November 2024. Dad began forgetting the names of common objects. Hand me that thing, he'd say to Desmond, pointing at the refrigerator. You know, the cold box. Desmond's eyes would light up, just for a second, but Dad saw it. Refrigerator Vernon, Desmond would say gently, patronizingly. It's called a refrigerator. Right, Dad would say, looking confused. I knew that. He'd repeat the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. Ask what day it was when he'd checked the calendar that morning. Shuffle when he walked even though his knees were fine. Pause mid-sentence like he'd lost his train of thought. During Desmond's visits, which increased to twice a week in November, Dad would look at papers Desmond brought and squint at them like the words didn't quite make sense. Ask to review them later. Say he needed to think about it. Desmond would pat his shoulder. Take your time, Vernon, no rush. But his eyes said different. His eyes said soon. Across the street, Floyd Ashford mowed his lawn and recorded everything in his notebook. December 15th. Floyd was trimming his hedges when Desmond came out of Dad's house and stood in the driveway on his cell phone. Floyd's hearing was better than most 70-year-olds. 40 years sorting mail had trained him to catch details. He heard Desmond say, Yeah, it's almost done. The old man's losing it. Another week, maybe 2. Then we move the property and you get your collateral. Floyd wrote it down. December 15th, 3:47 p.m. Man in BMW, son-in-law on phone in driveway. Said old man losing it another week. He didn't understand what it meant. He just wrote it down because that's what Floyd did. Recorded things. Kept track. He didn't know he was building a legal case. Dad told me months later when we were sitting at the walnut table after everything was over what the hardest part was. Not the acting, he said. Not pretending to forget things or shuffle around. That was easy. The hardest part was looking Desmond in the eye every time he came over, watching him think he was winning and not letting him see that I knew. That I knew exactly what he was doing. That he was walking into my trap. You want to know what separates a good con artist from a great one. A great one convinces you that helping them was your idea all along. Colleen Hewitt was a great con artist. I didn't figure it out until December 2024. Middle of the night, couldn't sleep. I'd been thinking about Saskia's discoveries. The 2009 lawsuit, the pattern, the 12 years of small deceptions building to this. And I thought about Desmond's mother, Colleen, 58 years old, supermarket cashier, widow for 20 years. She'd sit at our dinner table once a month, always after church, always in her good dress that was just worn enough to show she couldn't afford better, and talk about how hard it was to make ends meet. The cost of groceries, the rent increase, the medical bills. I'd listen, and at the end of the night I'd slip her an envelope, $400, cash, every month for 9 years. Starting in 2015, 6 months after Desmond first mentioned his mother was struggling, I thought I was being kind, being a good daughter-in-law, helping family. That night in December, I opened my laptop at 2 a.m. and did the math. $400 per month, 12 months per year, 9 years. $43,200. I sat there looking at that number. Then I pulled up Curtis's investigation files, the ones he'd shared with Dad, the ones Dad had shown me after he told me about the trap. The timeline of Desmond's gambling debt, the pattern of payments to Brent Wolf. I cross-referenced the dates. Every month, within 48 hours of my deposit into Colleen's account, there was a matching transfer from her account to Desmond's. Every single month, for 9 years. $43,200 of my sympathy money went straight to Brent Wolf's underground gambling operation to pay Desmond's monthly interest. Colleen wasn't struggling, she was laundering. She'd sit at our table and talk about how hard it was to afford her medication, how she had to choose between groceries and utilities, how she didn't know what she'd do without us. And I'd write the check, every time, because I believed her, because I thought I was helping. She played the pious widow at church, the struggling mother at family dinners, the grateful recipient who always said, "God bless you, dear, you don't know what this means." She knew exactly what it meant. It meant her son could keep gambling, keep stealing, keep building his con for 12 years without collapsing under the weight of his debt. Because I was funding it, voluntarily, out of the goodness of my heart. There's a special kind of cold that settles in when you realize the person you pitied was pitying you the whole time, pitying how easy you were to fool. I closed the laptop. It was 2:43 a.m. Desmond was asleep in the next room, snoring softly. I sat there in the dark and felt something I'd never felt before. Not rage. Rage is hot. Rage makes mistakes. This was arithmetic, cold, precise, calculated. Accountants don't cry when they find wrong figures. They adjust the spreadsheet. I opened a new document, started a list. Desmond, 12 years of fraud gambling debt forged documents. Colleen, 9 years of sympathy fraud, $43,200. Brent Wolf, loan shark extortion, organized crime. I was building my own case, my own spreadsheet of betrayal. But there was one line item I hadn't found yet. One more betrayal I hadn't calculated. One that was being funded with my own money and wearing lipstick. I just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks after I calculated my mother-in-law's betrayal at $43,200, Saskia walked into my office with a file that would add a face to the other half of that equation. "I need to show you something," she said, closing the door behind her. She slid a folder across my desk. I opened it. Bank statements. Desmond's secondary checking account, the one he'd set up for dealership expenses in 2021 that I'd authorized but never monitored. Weekly transfers, $800 to $1,200, every single week for 2 years, always to the same recipient. Celeste's Nail Studio, Yonkers, New York. Owner Celeste Townsend, age 32. Business opened March 2022. I remembered March 2022. Desmond had come to me with an investment opportunity, a dealership expansion, needed $30,000 from our joint savings. Said it was a sure thing. Partnership with a supplier that would bring in consistent revenue. I'd signed the withdrawal authorization. The expansion was a nail salon, for her. "Do you want me to?" Saskia started. "No," I said. My voice was steady. Accountant steady. "Keep the file. We're not making decisions from emotion. We're making them from math, and this number just got added to the equation." Saskia looked at me for a long moment. "Are you okay?" I almost laughed. Was I okay? My husband had a mistress. That was betrayal. But he'd used my money to open her business. That was making me complicit in my own humiliation. You want to know the difference between discovering your husband has a mistress and discovering you paid for her business. One is betrayal. The other is being made complicit in your own humiliation. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you for bringing this to me." Saskia nodded. She understood. She was an accountant too. She knew that sometimes the numbers tell you everything you need to know, and emotion is just noise that obscures the calculation. I closed the file. Celeste Townsend, 32 years old, weekly payments, my $30,000. I added her to my spreadsheet. Desmond, 12 years of fraud. Colleen $43,200. Celeste $30,000 startup plus 2 years of weekly support. The list was growing, but I still wasn't ready to act, not yet. I needed one more piece, one more confirmation. I didn't know I'd get it 3 weeks later, night before end day. Early January 2025. I was working late at the office, alone, 9 p.m. Everyone else had gone home. I was checking supplier invoices, routine work, the kind of thing I could do half asleep, when an automated system flag appeared on my screen. Vendor Westchester Auto Sales. Account status frozen. Reason outstanding bad debt exceeding credit limit. I stared at it. Westchester Auto Sales was Desmond's dealership. The dealership that was supposedly doing fine, breaking even, nothing to worry about. It was flagged in our own supplier database as a bad debt risk. I sat there looking at that red flag on my screen. Something inside me broke. Or maybe broke open. I'm still not sure which. It wasn't anger, wasn't even surprise. It was premonition, pure and simple. The kind that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to your body. I closed the laptop, grabbed my coat, walked to my car, and drove straight to Dad's house. I didn't call ahead, didn't text, didn't plan what I'd say. For 12 years, I'd been the person who planned everything, calculated everything, thought through every decision twice before making it once. That night, I drove to my father's house on pure instinct. It was the first honest thing I'd done in years. The drive took 20 minutes. White Plains streets at 9 p.m. Not much traffic. Cold January night. I didn't think about Desmond during that drive. Didn't think about Celeste or Colleen or the 43,000 or the 30,000 or the nail salon or the affair or any of it. I thought about Dad's kitchen, the walnut table, the smell of coffee and engine oil that never quite left that house no matter how many times he cleaned. I just needed to sit there, that's all I knew. I pulled up to his house at 9:47 p.m. The porch light was on. It was always on. Dad left it on every night since Mom died, said it made the house look less empty. I got out of the car, walked up the steps, raised my hand to knock. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that inside Dad had been pretending cognitive decline for 2 months. That Curtis Lowe had installed a recording device in the old kitchen radio. That Floyd Ashford across the street had documented every one of Desmond's visits in his meticulous notebook. That Dad had been performing planning waiting for exactly this moment. Because somehow through some combination of instinct and 30 years of being a father, Dad knew I would show up eventually. That something would break. That I'd drive to his house without calling. And that when I did, Desmond would follow. I knocked on the door. Dad opened it. For half a second, I saw something flash across his face. Not surprise. Something else. Recognition. Like he'd been waiting. Then his expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know why I'd driven here. I didn't know what I wanted to say. I just knew I needed to be here. "Can I come in?" I asked. Dad looked at me for one more second, then something in his face changed, hardened, set. He reached out, grabbed my shoulder, and pulled me inside. The door closed behind me with a solid click, and that's when he said it. The words that would split my life in half. "Listen to me. Get under the kitchen table, right now. Don't make a sound." I stared at him. He looked back with eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. And something harder underneath it. Something that looked like grim determination. I didn't ask why. I just obeyed. My father opened the door, and in the half second before he pulled me inside, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, not fear, but the look of a man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. His hand closed around my shoulder. Not rough, but absolute. The door shut behind me with a solid click. He turned me to face him, both hands on my shoulders, and locked eyes with me. "Lyora," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but carried more authority than I'd ever heard from him. "Look at me. Listen carefully. Don't make a sound. Get under this table immediately." He didn't say please, didn't explain, didn't ask if I was okay or what I was doing here at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. Just that command, delivered with the kind of certainty that bypasses thought entirely. I dropped to my knees. The walnut table, the same one I'd sat under as a child playing hide and seek, the same one where I'd eaten birthday cake and Christmas dinner and done homework, suddenly became a fortress. I crawled underneath, pulled my knees to my chest, pressed my back against the cold plaster wall. The smell hit me immediately. Floor polish, old wood, 37 years of family dinners absorbed into the grain. Dust particles floated in the yellow kitchen light, visible at floor level. I could see the legs of Dad's chair, the edge of the counter, the bottom of the refrigerator, the cold box, I thought, remembering his performance. Then silence. Not comfortable silence. Not the kind where you're alone in a house and everything is peaceful. The kind where every nerve in your body is listening. I counted 3 minutes. I know because I was watching the kitchen clock through the gap between the table leg and the wall. Each second marked by the soft, mechanical tick that had been the soundtrack of this house for as long as I could remember. 3 minutes of my father standing somewhere I couldn't see him from my angle waiting. Then the doorbell rang. You need to understand I didn't choose to crawl under that table because I understood what was happening. I did it because something in my father's voice told me my life depended on it. I heard Dad's slippers shuffle across the floor. Slow, deliberate, the shuffle of an old man who moved carefully. Except Dad didn't shuffle, not normally. His knees were fine. This was performance. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened. Desmond. Dad's voice drifted from the entryway. Warm, surprised. What brings you by? Just wanted to check on you, Vernon. Desmond's voice. The same voice I'd heard every single day for 12 years. See how you're feeling? Footsteps. I knew those footsteps, the rhythm of them, the weight, the pace. Desmond walked like someone who was always slightly in a hurry but trying not to show it. Quick steps that tried to be casual. But from under this table, hidden and listening with every nerve alive, they sounded completely different. Heavier, more deliberate. Not the footsteps of a son-in-law visiting family. The footsteps of someone coming to collect. They moved into the living room. I could see the edge of Desmond's shoes through the kitchen doorway. Brown leather. The ones I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. How are you feeling? Desmond asked. Did you remember to take your blood pressure medication this morning? Dad paused. Perfect hesitation. I think so. Or was that yesterday? The days get mixed up sometimes. That's okay, Desmond said. His voice was gentle, patient. That's normal. Don't worry about it. I heard him set something down. His bag, probably. The soft thump of leather on wood. His shoulders relaxed. I couldn't see it, but I heard it in the way his weight shifted the slight exhale. He thought he was winning. Can I get you something to drink? Dad asked. Coffee? That would be great, Desmond said. Thanks, Vernon. Footsteps moved toward the kitchen, Dad's slow shuffle, Desmond following behind. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to make myself smaller and visible. They were right above me now. I could see their shoes. Dad's old work boots, salt-stained from winter. Desmond's leather dress shoes. The coffee maker hissed and bubbled, the smell of brewing coffee mixed with the floor polish. So, Desmond said, his voice taking on that casual tone he used when he was about to ask for something. I wanted to talk to you about that paperwork we discussed, the property transfer. Oh, Dad said, right, what was it called again? The estate planning documents, Desmond said smoothly. Remember we talked about how it would make things easier for you, less to worry about. Yes, Dad said slowly, I remember, I think. I heard the coffee cups clink, the liquid pouring. Take your time thinking about it, Desmond said. No rush, I just want to make sure everything's taken care of properly. Then he laughed. That laugh. I'd heard it 10,000 times in 12 years. Across dinner tables, in bed, in the car on road trips, at family gatherings and date nights and lazy Sunday mornings. I thought I knew that laugh. I thought it was the sound of my husband's joy, his warmth, his easy charm. But from under this table, hearing it through the filter of everything I now knew, the 2009 lawsuit, Colleen's transfers, Celeste's nail salon, the burned bank letters, I heard it differently. There are sounds you hear 10,000 times before you hear them once. That laugh was one of them. It wasn't warm, it wasn't charming. It was the laugh of a hunter who believed he'd already won. The laugh of a predator who thought the trap had closed around someone else. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Above me, the coffee cups clinked again. Dad's voice murmured something I couldn't quite hear. The old radio on the counter, the one that had been there since 1998, sat silent except for its red recording light, invisible from where Desmond stood. Everything Vernon and Curtis had planned for 2 months was happening, and Desmond had no idea. The recording was running. Desmond thought he was winning, and I was witnessing the man I'd married become someone I'd never actually known. Through the 2-inch gap between the checkered tablecloth and the kitchen floor, I watched my husband's hand reach into his jacket pocket and pull out a small pill bottle. Amber plastic, the kind pharmacies use for prescriptions. He was standing at the counter, his back to Dad, who'd stepped into the living room to turn down the television volume. Just a second, Dad had said, shuffling away. Perfect timing, like he'd orchestrated it. Maybe he had. Desmond glanced over his shoulder, checked Dad's position, looked back at the counter. His hand moved with practiced efficiency, unscrewed the cap with his thumb, tilted the bottle. 2 white pills fell into his palm. He held them for half a second, then dropped them into one of the coffee cups sitting on the counter. The cup on the right, Vernon's cup. No hesitation, no second thought, just 2 pills disappearing into dark liquid. He screwed the cap back on, slipped the bottle into his pocket, picked up his own cup and took a sip. All of it silent, all of it smooth, all of it planned. Zolpidem, I would learn later. Prescription sedative. High dose. 2 pills was enough to knock out a 64-year-old man in under 20 minutes. Enough time to press his unconscious hand onto transfer documents, to take photos of his signature, to do whatever needed to be done while Vernon slept through it, waking hours later with no memory and no proof. But in that moment, watching through a 2-inch gap in my father's tablecloth, I only knew one thing. My husband was trying to drug my father. The crime had just escalated from property fraud to physical assault. I heard Dad's slippers shuffling back from the living room, 4 steps from the kitchen. 3. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything. If I revealed myself, the trap collapsed. Everything Curtis and Dad had built for 2 months, the recording, the evidence, the legal case would vanish. But if I stayed silent, Dad would drink that coffee. 2 steps. I pressed my fist against my mouth, bit down on the back of my hand. Hard enough that I tasted blood. 1 step. Dad entered the kitchen, reached for the counter. I need you to understand what it's like to watch someone you once loved try to poison your father. And know that if you scream, if you move, if you do anything, you destroy the only chance to stop him forever. Dad's hand was 6 inches from the cup. 5 inches. Desmond was saying something about property values, about estate planning, about how important it was to get these things in order. 4 inches. I couldn't look away, couldn't close my eyes, could only watch and bite my own hand and pray for something I didn't know how to pray for. 3 inches. Then Dad's eyes flicked down. Not at me, not at my face. At the angle where I was hidden, the specific angle that had given me line of sight to the counter, the angle that meant I'd seen what Desmond had done. It was a microsecond, less than that. A glance so quick that if I'd blinked I would have missed it. But I saw it, and he knew I'd seen it. And in that moment of silent communication, father to daughter, witness to witness, everything changed. Dad's hand moved past the coffee cup on the right, touched the edge of the counter. He looked at Desmond with that confused, elderly expression he'd been performing for 2 months. Actually, he said slowly, like he was just thinking of it. I'll just have water. Stomach's been a bit upset today. Coffee might not be the best idea. He turned to the sink, filled a glass, took a sip. The coffee cup sat on the counter, untouched. Drugged. Evidence. Desmond's face showed nothing. Oh, sure, hope you feel better. Nothing serious, I hope. No, Dad said. Just getting old. Things don't sit right like they used to. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. I let out the breath I'd been holding, silent, careful. My hand was still pressed against my mouth. When I pulled it away, I saw teeth marks, a crescent of broken skin, blood on my knuckles. I'd bitten myself hard enough to break through, but I hadn't made a sound. That microsecond of eye contact between my father and me, where he looked not at me, but at my angle, understood what I'd seen and saved himself without a word, was the moment I knew we'd win. Because that kind of communication doesn't come from planning. It comes from 30 years of being a father, of knowing your child well enough to read what they're not saying, of trusting them absolutely. Desmond didn't see it. He was looking at his phone, checking something, casual, comfortable. He had no idea what had just happened. No idea that the trap had just tightened another notch. No idea that the recording device had captured him standing with his back to Vernon for 47 seconds, the exact window when those pills were dropped. I watched the coffee cup from my position under the table. It sat there on the counter, brown ceramic. Dad's favorite mug, the one with a chip on the handle from 1994, when I'd knocked it off the table doing homework. 2 pills dissolving in the bottom. Zolpidem. Evidence of attempted assault on a senior citizen. Evidence of intent to incapacitate for the purpose of fraud. Evidence that would stand up in court. Desmond picked up his own cup, took another sip, set it down. So about those documents, he said, his voice shifting, less casual now, more focused. Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed, the transfer? Dad moved to the table, sat down heavily in his chair, the one right above where I was hidden. I'm still thinking, he said. It's a big decision. The house has been in the family a long time. I understand, Desmond said. He sat across from Dad. I could see his shoes, brown leather. But Vernon, you have to understand the timeline. There are complications. Financial complications that need to be resolved soon. His voice was different now. The warmth was fading. The mask was starting to slip. What kind of complications, Dad asked. And Desmond, thinking his sedatives were about to kick in any minute, thinking Vernon would be unconscious soon, thinking he'd already won, started to tell the truth. Desmond thought the sedatives would kick in any minute. He thought Vernon would be unconscious soon. He thought he'd already won. That's why he started telling the truth. Vernon, he said, and his voice cracked on the name. I need you to understand something. Brent Wolfe wants his money, and he doesn't take no for an answer. I'd never heard that name before, Brent Wolfe. From under the table, I watched Dad's face. He didn't react. Just sat there with that confused, elderly expression he'd perfected over 2 months. Who? Dad asked slowly. Brent Wolfe, Desmond repeated. He's the one who fronted the money for the dealership expansion. The one I told you about. Oh, Dad said. Right, how much was that again? Desmond's hands were shaking. I could see them from my angle. He picked up his coffee cup, the one that wasn't drugged, and took a sip to steady himself. It started as a business loan, he said, for inventory, to expand the lot, but things got complicated. Complicated how, Dad asked? The silence stretched. 3 seconds, 5, 7. This was Dad's strategy. Curtis had probably coached him on it. Ask a simple question, then wait. Let the silence become unbearable until the other person fills it. Desmond filled it. The dealership wasn't doing as well as I thought, he said. The margins were tighter, competition from the bigger lots. I thought I could turn it around. I just needed time. Dad said, neutral, giving nothing. So I took some risks. Desmond continued. His voice was getting faster now, more desperate. Tried to recoup the losses, football betting, underground operation. Nothing illegal. Well, technically it's illegal, but everyone does it. I thought I had a system. I thought I could predict the outcomes. He laughed. It sounded hollow. I was wrong, he said. The losses piled up. And Brent, he's not the kind of person you can just tell, I need more time. He wants collateral, real collateral, property. When Dad asked, what? When did this start? Another silence, shorter this time. About 3 years ago, Desmond said. The betting, the debt, it's been getting worse. 3 years. While I was giving Colleen $400 a month, while I was signing withdrawal authorizations for dealership investments. While I was sleeping next to him every night thinking we were building a life together. I pressed my hand over my mouth again. The bite mark from earlier throbbed. Dad's coffee cup sat on the table above me, still full, untouched, the drugged one. Desmond's hands shook so badly now that he had to set his own cup down. The contrast was surgical. You need to understand what it's like to watch someone you loved for 12 years disintegrate in real time. To hear him confess to years of lies while sitting 3 feet above your head. To know that every word is being recorded and will be used to destroy him. And to know that you can't make a sound. The dealership was never really profitable, Desmond said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. I told you it was breaking even. I told everyone that. But the truth is it's been hemorrhaging money for 2 years. I kept it running by doing things I shouldn't have done. What things, Dad asked? Desmond looked at him, looked around the kitchen. His eyes passed right over the spot where I was hidden. Then he said it. Money laundering. 2 words, dropped like stones. For Brent, Dad asked. Yeah, Desmond said. He needed a way to clean cash from his other operations, gambling, loan sharking, other stuff I don't ask about. The dealership was perfect. Fake car sales, inflated invoices, paper buyers who don't exist. I'd report the sales, wash the money through the business accounts, pay myself a percentage. He was confessing to federal crimes, on recording, in my father's kitchen. But then the IRS started looking closer at the dealership's numbers. Desmond continued, too many sales that didn't match up with inventory movement. I had to shut it down, stop the operation, and when I did, he stopped, swallowed. Brent wanted his money back, all of it, plus interest, plus penalties for stopping the operation without his permission. Before I tell you the exact amount he confessed to, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think the debt was manageable, or B, if it was catastrophic, and add one short reason why. Because what comes next is the number that breaks everything. Quick note. Some details ahead include fictionalized elements for narrative impact, but the core truth remains. How much, Dad asked. Desmond's voice dropped to barely audible. 150,000. The number hung in the air. Dad didn't react, just sat there, waiting. I don't have it, Desmond said. I don't have anything close to it. The dealership's failing. My credit's maxed. The truck's already mortgaged. Leora doesn't know about that. I've been intercepting the bank letters for a year. A year. Every morning at 6:47, checking the mail before I woke up. The only asset large enough is your house, Desmond said. It's worth $525,000. If I can transfer it to Brent's organization, he'll consider the debt paid. I'd be clear. I'd be safe. Safe. He said it like it mattered, like his safety was the priority. Dad's silence stretched again. Longer this time. 10 seconds. 15. I've been lying to Leora for over a year, Desmond said, filling the void. About everything. The money, the dealership, the debt. The house has always been the target. It's the only thing valuable enough. The only way out. He was crying now. Actual tears. I forged documents, he said. Fake lost property registration. Offshore accounts to hide the transfers. I've been planning this for months. Years, really. Since I married her. I knew the house would be there eventually. I just had to wait. Since he married me. The words cut through everything else. Dad let the silence sit for 20 full seconds. Then he spoke. His voice was different now. Still confused. Still elderly. But with something sharp underneath. So what about Leora? He asked. What are you going to do with her? The question hung in the air. Desmond's face went white. Above me, the old radio on the counter continued recording. Every word, every confession, every crime. So what about Leora? Dad asked. What are you going to do with her? Desmond's mouth opened, closed, opened again. 2 full seconds of silence that stretched like hours under Vernon's kitchen table. Then he spoke, and his voice was completely different. All the smoothness gone, all the charm, all the warmth I'd heard for 12 years. Just cold truth. Leora was never the plan, he said. The plan was always the house. 7 words that rewrote 12 years of marriage. I counted 3 seconds before I bit my hand again. Hard enough that the earlier wound opened, blood on my teeth. 3 seconds where I had to choose between screaming and destroying everything Dad had built, or staying silent and letting those words sit in the air like poison. I chose silence. Above me, Dad didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there. The silence did what it was supposed to do. Desmond started filling it. I mean, he said quickly, I didn't mean it like that. I'm under so much pressure, I'm not thinking straight, I'm talking nonsense. His voice was scrambling now, trying to claw back what he'd just said. I love Leora, he said. Of course I love her. We've been married 12 years. I just meant the house is the solution to the financial problem. That's all. The house fixes everything. It saves us. Us. Like I was part of his plan. Like I'd agreed to any of this. Dad still didn't speak. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10. And then Desmond, in his desperation to fill the void, delivered the final blow. Look, Vernon, he said, and his voice shifted again. Harder now. More honest. I've given 12 years to this marriage. 12 years of sacrifice. 12 years with a boring wife who only knows how to count money, who doesn't understand risk, who doesn't understand that sometimes you have to gamble to win. The house, your house, that's what I earned. That's what 12 years of endurance bought me. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. That had already broken. Something else. Something like the last thread of hope that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the man I'd loved was still in there somewhere. That thread snapped. And I knew with absolute certainty that the man I'd married had never existed. Dad stood up slowly from his chair. I heard his knees creak, heard his footsteps move toward the kitchen counter. Vernon, Desmond's voice had uncertainty in it now. Are you okay? Dad didn't answer. I watched his feet move to the counter, stop, turn. Then his hand, his weathered mechanic's hand that had fixed 10,000 broken things, pointed at the old radio. You just said it all, Dad said quietly. The radio's red recording light blinked once. I saw it from floor level, tiny crimson pulse that meant every word was captured. Desmond went very still. What, he said? But his voice knew, his body knew. He stood up, took a step toward the kitchen, looked at the radio, then looked down. Directly at the gap between the tablecloth and the floor, directly at me. Our eyes met. For one heartbeat, our entire marriage flashed across his face. Every dinner, every morning, every lie, every moment I'd believed him. Then it dissolved into something else. Fear. My body decided before my brain did. I crawled out from under the table, stood up. My dress was wrinkled. My hair was disheveled. My face had dried tears and fresh blood on my hand from where I'd bitten myself to stay silent. I looked at him. He looked at me. 2 seconds. That's how long it took him to cycle through his responses. Shock, then fear, then incredibly a smile, forced, desperate. Honey, he said, What are you doing here? I didn't know. I can explain. You said I was never part of the plan, I said. My voice was calm, accountant calm. The kind of calm that comes from finally seeing the numbers add up. My plan is just beginning now. The front door opened. Curtis Lowe walked in, 65 years old, retired NYPD, Dad's oldest friend. He looked at Desmond with eyes that had seen 30 years of criminals try to talk their way out of corners. Son, Curtis said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades in law enforcement. I was standing outside that door before you even rang the bell. He walked into the kitchen, stood next to Dad, looked at the radio. That old thing, Curtis said, almost conversationally. Been on that counter since 1998, hasn't it, Vernon? 1998, Dad confirmed. Funny thing about old radios, Curtis continued, looking at Desmond. Nobody ever looks twice at them. Been in the same spot so long they're invisible. He reached behind it, pulled out a small digital recording device connected by a thin wire. This, on the other hand, Curtis said, holding it up, is very new. Professional grade, voice activated, battery good for 48 hours, and it's been recording you from the first moment you walked into this house. Desmond's face drained of all color. You, he started. Everything, Curtis said. The Zolpidem you dropped in Vernon's coffee, the confession about Brent Wolfe, the money laundering, the fake property registration, the forged documents, the admission that you married Leora to get access to this house. Curtis looked at the device in his hand. New York is a one-party consent state, he said. Vernon can legally record any conversation in his own home, especially when documenting a crime being committed against him. This recording will stand up in court. All of it. Desmond looked at Dad, at Curtis, at me, at the radio. The trap had been set 2 months ago. The recording device installed 3 weeks ago. The performance perfected over 60 days of pretending to decline. And he'd walked right into it. The drugged coffee is still on the counter, Curtis said. We'll get that tested. Add attempted assault to the list. The forged psychiatric evaluation you showed Vernon 3 weeks ago, we have a copy of that too. Floyd Ashford across the street has been documenting every one of your visits in his neighborhood notebook for 2 years. Dates, times. That phone call you made in the driveway to Brent Wolfe on December 15th. Curtis put the recording device in his pocket. The trap wasn't set tonight, son, he said. It was set the day you snatched that quitclaim deed back from Vernon's hand. The day Vernon decided you weren't just a thief. You were dangerous. Desmond stood there, surrounded, cornered. The hunter had become the hunted. And the recording, every word, every confession, every betrayal existed. Legal, admissible, permanent. The recording captured everything. Desmond stood cornered, legal evidence of attempted assault, fraud, forgery, money laundering. He should have been terrified. Instead, he lifted his head and smiled. Not the warm smile I'd known for 12 years. Not the charming one he used on clients. Something else. Something bitter and sharp. You know what, he said, looking directly at me. Fine. You heard it all. The truth is out. He straightened his shoulders, adjusted his collar. But let me tell you something else while we're being honest, he said. That house does deserve to belong to me, because I earned it. 12 years. 12 years of sacrificing. 12 years of enduring a boring marriage with a woman who only knows how to count money, who doesn't take risks, who doesn't understand that life requires more than spreadsheets and caution. He looked at Dad, at Curtis, back at me. I gave 12 years to this family, he said, to her, to this. That house is what I'm owed for putting up with mediocrity. I stood there looking at him. I didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't cry, because I'd already heard worse tonight, already heard him say I was never the plan, already watched him try to drug my father. This was just noise. Dad didn't react either, just sat in his chair with that same calm expression. But Curtis moved. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, set it on the kitchen table face up. That's interesting, Curtis said, his voice still carrying that cop flatness. Because what I heard on that recording was confession to multiple felonies, elder financial abuse, attempted drugging of a senior citizen, fraud, money laundering, conspiracy with a known organized crime figure. He picked up the phone, started scrolling. This number, Curtis said, showing the screen to Desmond, is the State Department of Justice Elder Abuse Hotline. I can call it right now. They'll have officers here within 30 minutes, or... He looked at Desmond. You can leave. Get in your car, drive away, and turn yourself in tomorrow morning at the Westchester County Courthouse. Your choice. For the first time in 12 years, I saw actual fear on Desmond's face. Not stress, not worry, not the controlled panic I'd seen when he talked about Brent Wolfe. Real fear. The kind that comes from knowing you've run out of moves. He looked at the phone in Curtis's hand, at the recording device still sitting on the counter, at the drugged coffee cup, at me, at Dad. 4 witnesses, recorded confession, physical evidence. No way out. He made his choice. Desmond grabbed his coat from the chair, didn't put it on, just clutched it in his fist. He walked to the front door, fast, not running but close, shoved it open. The door hit the wall, hard. A paint chip spiraled to the floor, tiny white fragment of a marriage that just ended. His footsteps thundered down the porch steps. 3 stairs, 4, 5. I heard him hit the sidewalk, heard his car door open, slam shut. The engine roared, tires squealed, then silence. Curtis walked to the door, locked it, slid the chain into place. He won't be back tonight, he said. Dad nodded, slowly, like he was very tired. Thank you, Dad said to Curtis. Curtis just squeezed his shoulder. I'm going to go back to my place. Call me if anything changes. I'll have my phone on all night. He left through the back door, more discreet. Floyd Ashford across the street had probably seen enough for one evening, and then it was just Dad and me, in the kitchen where I'd crawled under a table 3 hours ago, where I'd bitten my own hand to stay silent, where I'd watched my husband try to drug my father and confess to 12 years of lies. I walked to the sink, turned on the water. It ran cold, clear, the sound filling the kitchen, and I cried. Not loud, not dramatic. My shoulders shook, but no sound came out. 12 years of marriage to someone who'd never existed. 12 years of thinking I was building a life when I was really just the collateral in someone else's con. My shoulders shook, but no sound came. 12 years of keeping things together, of being the calm one, of not making scenes trained me too well. I felt Dad's presence before I heard him. His footsteps on the linoleum, slow, careful. Then his hand on my shoulder. Heavy, warm, steady. Dad's here, he said. 2 words. That's all. Not it'll be okay. Not don't cry. Not we'll figure this out. Just Dad's here. And somehow that was everything. Because for 12 years I'd been alone. Even when Desmond was in the room. Even when we were lying next to each other in bed. Even when we were having dinner or watching television or pretending to be a normal married couple. I'd been alone, carrying the weight of a life I didn't understand. Making excuses for things that didn't add up. Ignoring instincts because I wanted to believe in something that had never been real. But right now, standing at my father's kitchen sink with water running and my shoulders shaking and blood still on my hand from biting myself to stay silent, I wasn't alone. The water ran. I cried. Dad's hand stayed on my shoulder. We stood there for 5 minutes, maybe 10. I lost track of time. Finally, I turned off the tap, wiped my face with the back of my hand, looked at Dad. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, tired, but also something else. Relieved. How long have you known? I asked. My voice was raw. Since the wedding, he said. Maybe before, I couldn't prove it. Not until he got desperate enough to make mistakes. 2 months, I said. You've been planning this for 2 months. Longer, Dad said. I've been watching for 12 years, planning for 2 months. He pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. I needed you to hear it yourself, he said. If I'd told you, you might have doubted. Might have wanted to give him another chance. Might have thought I was wrong. He looked at me with those mechanic's eyes that had fixed 1,000 broken things. But if you heard it yourself, he said, there'd be no doubt. I sat down across from him, at the walnut table where I'd hidden 3 hours ago, where my mother had served breakfast for 28 years, where the recording device had captured every word of my husband's confession. What happens now? I asked. Dad reached across the table, put his weathered hand over mine. Now, he said, we make sure he can never do this to anyone else. Now we make sure he can never do this to anyone else, Dad said. I nodded, went home, didn't sleep, sat on my bed looking at the ceiling until the sky started to lighten. At 6 a.m. I got up, put on the same coat I'd been wearing, drove to Westchester County Family Court. The family court opens at 7:30 a.m. I was waiting at the door at 7:15, still wearing yesterday's coat. The security guard unlocked the glass doors at 7:28. Looked at me standing there alone. You okay, ma'am? He asked. I'm fine, I said. I just need to file something. He let me in. I walked to the clerk's office, filled out the paperwork, divorce petition, emergency motion for state asset freeze, request for protective order. My handwriting was steady, accountant handwriting, the kind that fills out forms for a living. At 7:45 a.m., I walked to the filing window. The clerk was a woman in her 50s, reading glasses on a chain, kind eyes that had probably seen 1,000 desperate people walk up to this window. She looked at my forms, then looked at me. Really looked. My coat was wrinkled. My eyes were red. and on my right elbow, visible when I handed her the paperwork, was a smear of floor wax. Residue from crawling under Dad's kitchen table 12 hours ago. "Would you like to sit down and rest for a moment?" she asked gently. "You look like you've had a hard night." "No," I said. "I want to file before 8 a.m. She held my gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded. Stamped the petition, filed the emergency motion, entered it into the system. "The asset freeze will be processed within 2 hours," she said. "By 9 a.m., all jointly held assets will be frozen pending court review." "Thank you," I said. I walked out of the courthouse at 7:52 a.m. By 9 a.m., every car on Desmond's dealership lot would be sealed. Couldn't be sold, couldn't be moved, couldn't be used as collateral for anything. Brent Wolf's leverage just evaporated. I drove to work, sat at my desk, opened my email. 14 messages from Desmond. The first one sent at 11 p.m. last night, the last one at 6:30 this morning. Subject lines ranging from, "We need to talk," to, "You're making a mistake," to, "I can explain everything." I didn't open any of them, just forwarded them all to Curtis. Evidence. Saskia knocked on my office door at 9:15. "You're here," she said, surprised. "I didn't think you'd come in today." "Where else would I be?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, then closed the door behind her. "We need to compile everything," she said. Over the next week, Saskia became my war strategist. She pulled every piece of financial documentation from the last 12 years. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card bills, every receipt I'd saved, every authorization I'd signed. She cross-referenced Desmond's voicemails, which ranged from apologies to barely veiled threats with text messages. Time-stamped everything, built a chronological timeline of financial irregularities. She tracked Vernon's retirement account withdrawals, matched them to the papers Desmond had brought for signing. 47 signatures over 4 years, $12,000 drained in increments small enough to avoid detection. She found Celeste's nail salon receipts buried in Desmond's secondary account records, weekly transfers, startup capital, operating expenses. And then in a business credit search that took her 3 days to navigate, she found something else. She walked into my office on the 7th day after end day, set a folder on my desk. "You need to see this," she said. I opened it. Promissory note. $80,000. Issued by a credit institution I didn't recognize, one of Brent Wolf's shell companies probably. Borrower name Celeste Townsend. Guarantor Desmond Hewitt. I stared at it. "He put a loan in her name," Saskia said quietly. $80,000. Used it to fund something, probably payments to Brent. But she's the one on the hook. If Brent forecloses, she loses everything first. The salon, her credit, everything. The floor wax stain on my elbow was still visible when the clerk stamped my petition. 12 hours after hiding under a table, I was filing paperwork that would freeze my husband's assets and begin the legal process of destroying him. $80,000. The number made Saskia go silent for 3 full seconds. Because that's what Desmond did. He didn't just use people, he set them up to take the fall. Colleen with her sympathy fraud. Me with my signature on withdrawals I didn't understand. Vernon with papers he thought were HOA updates. And Celeste, the mistress. I'd discovered 3 weeks ago. The woman whose nail salon I'd funded without knowing it, she was just another liability shield. Another person positioned between Desmond and consequences. "He's using her," I said. "Yeah," Saskia said. "And she probably doesn't even know. If she defaults on this loan, Brent Wolf comes after her first. Desmond walks away clean." I looked at the promissory note, at Celeste's signature, at the date March 2023, right when the nail salon opened. Right when Desmond told me he was investing in dealership expansion. My $30,000 opened her business. Brent Wolf's $80,000 put a noose around her neck, and Desmond stood in the middle using both of us as shields. "Her nail salon address," I said. "Do you have it?" Saskia looked at me. Her eyes widened slightly. "Yonkers," she said. "Celeste's nail studio. Why?" "Because she needs to know what he did to her," I said. "Before Brent Wolf comes calling." "You're going to talk to her?" Saskia asked. I picked up the promissory note. $80,000. Celeste's name. Desmond's guarantee. "I'm going to show her this," I said. "And then I'm going to ask her if she wants to be a victim or a witness." Saskia was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just watched a chess player make a move that changes everything. "You're not going there for revenge," she said. "No," I said. "I'm going there for evidence, and maybe if she's smart, for an ally." Because the mistress wasn't just complicit. She was another victim. Another person Desmond had used and discarded and set up to take the fall. And if I could show her that if I could prove it with an $80,000 promissory note in her own name, she might choose her own survival over his lies. The door chime at Celeste's nail salon rings at 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes after closing. I can see her through the glass, late 30s, dark hair pulled back, moving between stations with practiced efficiency. The lights are still on. She turns toward the sound, and for 3 seconds we just look at each other through the door. She doesn't unlock it right away. I hold up the folded paper so she can see it. Not aggressive, just visible. She stares at it, then walks to the door and turns the deadbolt. "We're closed," she says, her voice is careful, not hostile. "I know. This won't take long." I step inside. The salon smells like acetone and lavender. 4 stations, all immaculate. "I didn't come here to hit you." I unfold the promissory note and place it on the reception desk between us. "I came here because we have the same enemy." She looks at the paper. I watch her eyes move across the lines. $80,000. Her name. Desmond's signature as guarantor. October 2024. "Where did you get this?" Her voice is flat now. "Bank records. My lawyer found it last week." I don't sit down. Neither does she. "Did you sign this?" "Yes." "Did you know what it was for?" She looks up at me. "He said it was for business expansion, a second location. He had the whole pitch ready, market analysis, demographic projections, revenue forecasts. He made it sound like he was investing in me. But he wasn't." "No," she touches the paper. "He was using my credit to cover his gambling debt, wasn't he?" "It's not a question," I nod anyway. $80,000. She says it like she's tasting something bitter. "I've been making payments for 3 months, $1,500 a month. I thought I was building something." "You were, just not what he told you." She walks to one of the salon chairs and sits on the armrest, perched, ready to move. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because he's letting you take this. Do you know that I stay standing? When this goes to court, your name is primary. If he declares bankruptcy, the bank comes after you first. You lose this place, maybe your house, everything you built before you ever met him." She's quiet for a long moment. "Then you filed for divorce." 2 weeks ago. He told me he was going to divorce you this year." She looks at me directly. "He had a whole timeline. April, he said. After tax season." Something cold moves through my chest. "I know, and I did it 2 weeks before him." She almost smiles, not quite. "How much does he owe?" $150,000. That we know about." I move closer. "There's a man named Brent Wolf. He runs a card game in White Plains. Desmond's been going there for years." "Years," she repeats it softly. "Since before he met you. Before he met me." I pull out my phone and show her the photo Curtis took Desmond walking into that warehouse on Commerce Street December 1st. "We have recordings, bank records, testimony from my father's pension company. Desmond's good at this. He's been doing it for years, but he got sloppy." She studies the photo. "What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything. I'm offering you something." "Which is a way out." I put the phone away. "Right now, you're collateral damage. You're the mistress who got scammed, and when this goes public, that's the only story people will hear. But if you come forward first, if you document what he did to you, you're not the other woman. You're another victim. And that changes everything." Here's what nobody tells you about confrontation: the moment before someone decides is completely silent. Celeste sits on that armrest looking at the promissory note, and I can see her doing the math. Not emotional math, financial math, survival math. "He told me you were controlling," she says finally, "that you monitored all his accounts, that you wouldn't let him make decisions without your approval. He made it sound like you were the reason he needed space." "I monitored the accounts because he kept draining them. I tracked his decisions because he kept lying about where the money went." I sit down now in the chair across from her. "He's really good at making you feel like the problem is you." She nods slowly. "Yeah, he is." "Do you love him?" The question comes out before I can stop it. Too personal, too raw. But she doesn't flinch. "I don't know what I felt, but I know what I feel now." She looks at me. "Used." "Good, because we can use that." She stands and walks to the reception desk, picks up the promissory note, and reads it again more carefully. When she looks up, something has shifted in her face. Not guilt, not shame, calculation. "I need to see your lawyer," she says. I pull out Saskia's card and hand it to her. "She passed the bar 2 years ago. Accounting was always the day job." "She's expecting your call. Tell her I sent you." She'll walk you through everything: what to document, what to preserve, how to protect yourself when this goes public. And it will go public. When the preliminary hearing is in 6 weeks, April 3rd, Judge Thornton. Desmond's lawyer is good, but he's working with incomplete information. He doesn't know about you yet. I gesture to the promissory note in her hand. When my lawyer introduces you as a witness, not just a mistress, that changes the entire narrative. Celeste folds the paper carefully and slips it into her pocket. What if I said no? What if I just walked away? Then you're out $80,000 and Desmond gets to tell the story where you were complicit, where you knew what was happening and helped him. Is that the story you want? No? Then call Saskia tomorrow before you change your mind. I stand and head for the door. My hand is on the handle when she speaks again. Why are you helping me? I turn back. I'm not helping you, I'm helping me. But it turns out those two things look the same right now. She almost smiles again. This time it reaches her eyes. You're scarier than he said. Good. I walk out into the January cold. The door chime rings behind me. Through the glass, I see her pull out her phone and look at Saskia's card. She's already dialing. 2 women who should be enemies. 1 predator who made that mistake. In the car, I text Saskia she's calling tomorrow. Be ready. The response comes 30 seconds later. Already am. Judge Gail Thornton enters at 9:47 a.m. and the courtroom rises as one. She's maybe 60, sharp-eyed, wearing reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She doesn't smile. She doesn't need to. She moves like someone who has heard every lie and learned to measure truth by weight instead of volume. When she sits, we sit. When she looks at the case file in front of her, the whole room holds its breath. Saskia is to my left. Curtis is 2 rows behind me. Dad stayed home. He offered to come, but I told him he'd already done enough. Across the aisle, Desmond sits next to Keith Sinclair, his defense attorney. Sinclair is 50-something, gray suit, expensive watch, the kind of lawyer who bills by the quarter hour and makes you feel it. He shuffles papers like a card sharp, warming up. Judge Thornton adjusts her glasses. Counsel, we're here for the matter of Brennan versus Hewitt. Dissolution of marriage, division of assets, fraud allegations. I've reviewed the initial filings. Mr. Sinclair, you filed a motion to suppress certain evidence. Let's address that first. Sinclair stands. Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff has submitted an audio recording allegedly made in December of last year. This recording violates my client's privacy rights and was illegally collected. We move to have it excluded from evidence. Saskia stands. Your Honor. The recording was made by Vernon Brennan in his own home under New York's one-party consent law. Mr. Brennan is the victim of attempted financial elder abuse. He had every legal right to document conversations in his own kitchen. The recording was made without my client's knowledge or consent. Sinclair counters. It's a clear violation. Counsel? Judge Thornton's voice doesn't rise, but it cuts clean through. She leans forward slightly. Are you telling me that a 64-year-old retired man cannot record a conversation in his own kitchen? Sinclair hesitates, just for a second, but it's enough. Your Honor, the circumstances. The circumstances are that your client entered Mr. Brennan's home and attempted to manipulate him into signing away property while he was allegedly cognitively impaired. Is that your defense? We dispute the characterization. I'm sure you do. Judge Thornton picks up a sheet of paper and reads it. Then she sets it down and looks directly at Sinclair. Motion denied. The recording is admissible. New York is a one-party consent state, and Mr. Brennan was that party. If your client didn't want to be recorded attempting to defraud a senior citizen, perhaps he shouldn't have attempted to defraud a senior citizen. Behind me, I hear Desmond breathing heavily. The judge's stamp hits the paper, one decisive sound that admits the recording and seals Desmond's fate. Saskia plays the audio. The courtroom speakers are better than I expected. Every word is clear. Desmond's voice explaining how Dad just needs to sign the quitclaim deed, how it's just paperwork, how nobody needs to worry. Then Brent Wolf's name, the 150,000, the casual cruelty of Leora was never the plan. When it ends, the silence is so complete I can hear the ventilation system. Judge Thornton makes a note. Mr. Sinclair, does your client wish to dispute the authenticity of this recording? Sinclair glances at Desmond. Desmond's face is blank. No, Your Honor. Good, let's move on. I understand there's a second witness. Saskia nods. Yes, Your Honor, we call Celeste Townsend. Celeste walks to the witness chair. She's dressed simply: navy blouse, black pants, no jewelry except small earrings. She takes the oath without hesitation. When she sits, she looks straight ahead, not at Desmond, not at me. Saskia walks her through it. The salon, the relationship, the business expansion pitch, the $80,000 promissory note she signed in October 3 months before end day. How Desmond told her it was an investment. How she found out later it was covering his gambling debt. How he promised to divorce me in April. How I filed in January instead. Did you know Mr. Hewitt was married when you began the relationship? Saskia asks. Yes, Celeste says. He told me the marriage was over, that it was just paperwork. And the $80,000. Did you consent to that loan being taken in your name? I signed the papers, but I didn't know what they were really for. He lied about the purpose. He lied about everything. Sinclair cross-examines, but his heart isn't in it. Celeste doesn't break. She doesn't cry. She just states facts one after another until there's nothing left to argue. Judge Thornton makes more notes, then she looks up. Here's what I see, she says. Mr. Hewitt systematically defrauded multiple parties, his wife, his father-in-law, Ms. Townsend, and likely others. He used marriage as a vehicle for financial access, falsified documents, withdrew pension funds without authorization, and attempted to manipulate a senior citizen into signing away property. The evidence is overwhelming. The audio recording is damning. The financial records are conclusive. She pauses. The marital home at 47 Maple Ridge Drive, valued at $525,000, is awarded to the plaintiff. Mr. Brennan's suburban property remains under his sole ownership. The promissory note in Ms. Townsend's name is declared invalid due to fraud in the inducement. Any claims by third parties, including Mr. Brent Wolfe, are dismissed. Mr. Hewitt is ordered to pay all court costs and legal fees. I don't look at Desmond when the verdict is read. There's nothing left to see. Judge Thornton stands. We stand. She leaves. The courtroom starts to breathe again. Saskia squeezes my arm. You did it. I nod. I can't speak yet. Curtis meets me in the hallway. Your dad's going to want to hear this. I know. I walk outside into April sunlight. The courthouse steps are granite worn smooth by decades of people walking away from verdicts. I pull out my phone and dial. He picks up on the first ring. It's over, Dad, I say. Silence, then all of it. All of it. The house, your house, everything. Another pause. When he speaks again, his voice is steady and warm. Dad's making coffee. Would you like to come over? I walk toward my car, leaving the courthouse behind. Yes, I say, I would. Dad's kitchen smells like coffee and decades. I sit at the walnut table while he pours 2 cups slow and careful, like the verdict still needs to settle. We don't talk about the trial. We don't need to. He hands me a mug, sits across from me, and we drink in silence that feels like winning. That was April. 6 months after the trial, Saskia calls to tell me Desmond is working at a used car junkyard 2 states away. Someone saw him there stripping parts off a rusted Chevy, wearing coveralls with someone else's name stitched on the pocket. I thought you'd want to know, she says. I didn't seek this information, I didn't need it. But I listen anyway because closure comes in strange packages. The dominoes fell exactly the way physics predicted. The dealership revoked his license in May, money laundering, fraudulent transactions, failure to maintain fiduciary standards. Brent Wolfe seized the remaining cars in June as partial payment on the debt. The state revoked Desmond's passport in July when he failed to comply with a court-ordered asset disclosure. No assets, no income, no allies. Friends drifted as the story spread the way friends do when the story gets too complicated to explain at dinner parties. So he works at a junkyard now, not because I wanted revenge, because he ran out of choices. From dealership manager to junkyard worker, perfect poetic justice. The kind of irony that writes itself. Thank you for telling me, I say to Saskia. Then I close the laptop and go back to work on the consulting office application. Life doesn't pause for epilogues. In September, the criminal investigation that began after the trial expands. Colleen is arrested at the supermarket where she works complicity in financial fraud against an elderly person concealing criminal assets. The police walk her out past the produce section while customers pretend not to stare. I hear about it from Curtis, who heard it from someone who heard it from someone else. I don't go to see her arrested, I don't need to. I think about the number instead. $43,200. 9 years of monthly payments. Desmond called it pity. The court called it conspiracy. I call it closed. Brent Wolfe is prosecuted in October for organized usury and extortion. The state built a file 2 inches thick, 12 years of victims' ledgers kept in a storage unit, interest rates that violated every statute on the books. His lawyer argues he was just running a card game. The prosecutor argues he was running a criminal enterprise. The jury takes 4 hours. Criminal justice is complete. Everyone faces consequences. I open my laptop and move on. In August, 2 months before Colleen's arrest, Dad and I spend 2 days at the walnut table doing what we should have done years ago, securing his house against anyone who might ever try to take it again. We establish a living trust, a life estate deed that guarantees his residency for as long as he lives. Updated ownership documents registered with the county. Fraud alert registration with New York's Elder Protection System. Curtis handles the notarizations, brings his stamp and his reading glasses, spreads the papers across the table like a man who has done this before. "Well," he says when the last signature is dry, "now things are exactly as they should be." Dad nods. He reads every clause, every line, the way someone reads a contract when they've learned what happens if you don't. The same walnut table 6 months ago I hid beneath it in tears. Today I sign legal documents on top of it in silence. On the last night after Curtis leaves, Dad makes coffee. Decaf this time because it's nearly 10 p.m. and neither of us is 20 anymore. He pours 2 cups and sits down across from me, and the kitchen is quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I look at the table, really look at it. The grain runs in long, patient lines. There are water rings from decades of coffee mugs, a small gouge near the edge where someone Dad probably dropped a knife 40 years ago. It's just a table, but it held the recording device. It hid me when I needed hiding. It became the place where everything turned. I run my hand across the surface. The wood is cool and smooth. "Dad," I say, "why did you choose to hide me under the table that night instead of sending me home?" He doesn't answer right away. He takes a sip of coffee, sets the mug down carefully on one of the water rings, looks at me the way fathers look at daughters when they're deciding how much truth fits in one conversation. Then he says, "Because I know you." I wait for more. There's always more. But he just sits there holding his coffee, looking at me like he said everything that needs saying. "What does that mean?" I ask. "It means I know you," he repeats. Not unkindly, not evasively, just stating a fact the way you state that water is wet or winter is cold. I stare at him. He stares back. There's something in his expression I can't name. Not pity, not pride, not quite. Something older than both. Something that feels like recognition. "Dad, you'll figure it out," he says. He stands up, rinses his mug in the sink, sets it in the dish rack. "You always do." He pats my shoulder on his way out of the kitchen. His hand is warm and solid and certain. Then he's gone, and I'm sitting alone at the walnut table with half a cup of decaf and a cryptic answer that sounds like a riddle I'm supposed to already know the solution to. "Because I know you." I look at the spot under the table where I crouched 6 months ago, listening to Desmond's footsteps, my heart hammering so hard I thought he'd hear it. The space looks smaller now, tighter, like something you'd have to fold yourself into, like something you'd only fit inside if you were desperate or determined or both. "Because I know you." I finish my coffee. I don't understand yet, but I will. I spend 3 days thinking about Dad's answer. "Because I know you." The words loop in my head while I'm working, while I'm driving, while I'm making coffee at the counter where he makes coffee. I wait for the explanation to arrive on its own, the way solutions sometimes do when you stop chasing them. It doesn't come. Curtis calls in October with a single question. "Can you meet someone who needs to tell you his story?" "Who?" "Friend of mine, Otis. He's having trouble. I think you'd understand." We meet at a coffee shop on Mamaroneck Avenue. Otis Padilla is 60, maybe 62, with carpenter's hands, thick knuckles, permanent sawdust in the creases, calluses that look like geography. He orders black coffee and sits across from me like a man who's rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but still doesn't know how to start. "Curtis says you help people," he says finally. "I'm starting to," I say. "What happened?" He tells me the story in pieces. 30 years running a carpentry workshop. His daughter married a man who seemed solid. Good job, good manners, showed up on time. 2 years later, the son-in-law convinced Otis to make him a co-owner on the business tax benefits, he said. Succession planning. Then came the loans Otis never signed for. Equipment sold without permission. Contracts redirected. By the time Otis realized what was happening, the workshop belonged to the son-in-law legally, and Otis was working in the business he'd built for 30 years as an hourly employee. I didn't think I'd tell anyone this story, he says. But my friend said you might understand. I understand, I say, because I sat under a table and heard it all. He looks at me, really looks. You were there. I was there. He nods slowly like something just made sense that didn't before. We talk for 2 hours. I explain what worked in my case documentation, witnesses, legal structures that protect against coercion. I mention Saskia's name. I walk him through the process step by step the way someone should have walked me through it years ago when I first started seeing the pattern, but didn't have a name for it yet. When we're done, he sits back in his chair and exhales like he's been holding his breath since he walked in. This isn't isolated, I say, not a question. A realization arriving in real time. You know other people with similar problems. My wife's friend, he says, lost her house to her nephew. And a guy from my bowling league, his brother-in-law took out a mortgage he didn't know about. I write that down. Not because I need to remember it, because it needs to be written down. Because patterns only become visible when you map them. Otis stands and shakes my hand. His grip is firm the way carpenter's work is firm, built to last, built to hold. His eyes are wet with something that looks like relief. What do I owe you, he asks. Nothing yet, I say. When we're done fixing it, we'll talk about fees. Right now, you just owe me documentation. Everything you can find, contracts, emails, bank statements, bring it all. He nods. Then he leaves and I sit at the table with 2 empty coffee cups and the beginning of something I don't have a name for yet. He refers 3 people to me in the next week. In November, I open the office. Ground floor of a commercial building in White Plains, 2 rooms and a waiting area with a sofa that smells like someone else's furniture, and a coffee maker that came with the lease. I put my name on the door in vinyl letters, Senior Asset Protection Consulting. It sounds official. It sounds like someone who knows what they're doing. Dad shows up at 9 a.m. on opening day. He sits on the sofa, pours himself coffee from the machine that makes terrible coffee, and picks up a 6-month-old magazine about home improvement. You don't have to stay, I say. I know, he says. He doesn't leave. Otis arrives at 10 for his follow-up appointment. We spend an hour going through the documents he brought, contracts, loan papers, emails where the son-in-law promised things he never delivered. It's all there. The whole story written in paper and ink and lies that don't hold up under daylight. Through the glass door, I can see Dad in the waiting room. He's flipping another magazine page, but his eyes aren't on the magazine. They're on me. That look, the one I can't quite name. The one that's been there since the night under the table. The one that isn't pity or pride, but something older than both. Otis leaves at 11. 2 more clients come in the afternoon. Curtis stops by with lunch and stays for 20 minutes talking to Dad about something I can't hear through the glass. When I finish with the last client at 5, I lock the files in the cabinet, turn off the lights, and walk outside. Dad is waiting on the sidewalk. What were you doing sitting there all day, I ask. Drinking coffee, he says. I almost laugh. The coffee here isn't as good as yours. I know, he says. He starts walking toward his car, then stops and turns back. But you need someone sitting there. I stare at him. What? First day, he says. Empty waiting room looks like nobody trusts you yet. Someone sitting there, even if it's just your dad reading old magazines, makes it look like people come here, like you're someone worth waiting for. My throat tightens. I don't trust my voice yet, so I just nod. He pats my shoulder the same way he did in his kitchen a month ago. You did good today. Then he gets in his car and drives away, and I stand on the sidewalk in the November cold, watching his taillights disappear, understanding for the first time what quiet support looks like when it doesn't announce itself. Not elaborate praise, not grand celebration, just Dad making sure my waiting room isn't empty on my first day. Just someone sitting there drinking terrible coffee so I don't have to start alone. That night, standing on the sidewalk after locking up, I finally call Dad to ask the question I've held for months. He picks up on the second ring. Hey, Dad, I say, why didn't you send me home that night instead of hiding me under the table? Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that means he's choosing his words carefully the way he always does when the answer matters. Because if I told you, he says finally, you might doubt me. You might think I was exaggerating. You might think I misunderstood. But if you hear it yourself, there's no way you'll doubt anymore. I needed you to be sure, not believe. Be certain. Something in my chest lightens, like a button that's been fastened too tight for years suddenly coming undone. You knew, I say. You knew what I needed wasn't protection, it was proof. I know you, he says. Same words as before, but this time they land different. This time I understand. Thank you, I say. My voice cracks slightly. Thank you for the table. He laughs soft, warm, the sound of a father who just watched his daughter understand something important. Yeah, that table is heavy but very sturdy. I hang up and walk toward my car. There's no hurry, no need to hurry. The November air is cold but not biting. The streetlights cast yellow pools on the pavement. Somewhere nearby, someone's mowing their lawn one last time before winter, and the smell of cut grass mixes with the dampness left over from afternoon rain. White Plains isn't Denver. It's not Manhattan. It's just a normal suburb with normal streets and normal lives happening behind normal windows. And for the first time in 12 years, I'm walking toward myself. Not toward someone who needs me. Not away from someone chasing me. Just me and a life that actually belongs to me. It wasn't loud freedom. It wasn't the kind that announces itself with fireworks or declarations or dramatic gestures. It was the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything because it already knows it's not going anywhere. I unlock the car and sit in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. My phone buzzes. A text from Otis. Thank you again. My lawyer says we have a strong case. I reply, good, keep documenting everything. Another text, this one from Curtis Hurd, opening day went well. Proud of you, kid. I don't reply to that one right away. I just sit with it. Proud of you. 4 words I didn't realize I needed to hear until they arrived. The accounting is complete now, all the numbers balanced, all the debts collected or forgiven. Desmond, the used car manager who stood in Dad's kitchen and said the house rightfully belonged to him, works at a junkyard 2 states over. No dealership, no license, no passport because the court revoked it when he failed to comply with asset disclosure. No property because the judge awarded it all to me. No allies because the story spread and people learned what he was. The Ford F-150. The truck he bought with money stolen from my account, the one he let the bank repossess, rather than make payments, showed up at auction 3 months ago. I bought it back. Not because I needed a truck, not because it was a good deal, because I could. Because it felt like closing a circle that needed closing. Colleen is awaiting trial. The prosecutor's office built a case 2 inches thick, conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, concealment of criminal assets, accessory after the fact. Her lawyer tried to argue she didn't know what Desmond was doing. The prosecutor played the recorded phone call where she asked him how much longer before the old man signs. The lawyer stopped arguing after that. Brent Wolf is facing 15 years. Organized usury, extortion, racketeering. The state found 12 years of victims, all of them willing to testify. His card game is closed. His warehouse on Commerce Street is empty. Justice moves slow, but it moves. I start the engine. The dashboard lights glow soft green. The radio turns on automatically some song I don't recognize about second chances and new beginnings. I don't change the station. The greatest irony of all this, the part that would be funny if it weren't so perfectly impossibly appropriate, is that Desmond spent 12 years trying to take everything from me. He took my money, I got it back plus his half. He took my sense of safety. I built it back stronger with better locks and legal protections and a network of people who actually know how to help. He took my father's pension. We recovered it, documented it, used it as evidence that put him exactly where he belongs. He tried to take Dad's house. It's more secure now than it ever was before, wrapped in legal structures that can't be manipulated or coerced, or signed away under pressure. He tried to take my belief in my own judgment. Instead, he gave me proof that my judgment was right all along. That the instinct I ignored for years, the one that said something is wrong here, something doesn't add up, was accurate from the beginning. Every single thing he tried to take, he failed. Except one. In the end, the only thing he succeeded in taking was himself out of my life. And that, as it turns out, was the greatest gift he ever gave me. I pull out of the parking lot and drive toward home. The house with my name on the deed, the one I almost lost, and then fought to keep, and finally won. The streetlights guide me through intersections I know by heart now. Left on Maple Ridge, right at the stop sign. Home. The walnut table taught me something Dad knew all along: certainty is worth more than comfort. Proof is worth more than promises. And sometimes the best gift someone can give you is the motivation to save yourself. I park in the driveway. The porch light is on. Inside there's coffee I'll make in the morning, files I'll review, clients I'll help because I know exactly what they're going through. But tonight I just sit in the car for one more moment, engine off, breathing the quiet, free. And to you listening to my story, remember this: sometimes the people closest to you are the ones hiding the deepest secrets. Looking back, I realize I ignored so many red flags because I wanted to believe in the life I thought we were building. I convinced myself that love meant trusting blindly, that questioning meant failing. Don't make my mistake. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Family betrayal doesn't always announce itself. It hides in plain sight, wearing the mask of someone you love. What I learned is that protecting yourself isn't giving up on people. It means documenting what you see, asking questions when things don't add up. This wasn't about family revenge, it was about survival. When you face family betrayal, you don't have to choose between love and self-protection. I believe God gave me that table for a reason, to hear the truth and find strength to act on it. The lesson isn't that people will hurt you. It's that you're stronger than their lies. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you experienced family betrayal? What would you have done? Was this justice or family revenge? Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. I share new stories every week about family revenge, forgiveness, and finding your way forward. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time means more to me than you know. One final note: while based on real experiences, some details have been adjusted for storytelling. What remains true is the lesson. I hope it stays with you.